All right, this morning we are continuing our series on the parables, working our way through some of these profound teachings of Jesus. And I have loved resurrecting some old parables so today's parable from 2014, took it out, looked through it, revised it, and man, these parables, they still do something to me after having read them so many times. And the title of today's sermon is Dressing in Purple and Rocking the Fine Egyptian Linen. Luke chapter 16. Let's begin with the parable. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen. The Greek would say fine Egyptian linen. This is someone who has style. This is someone who wears the best of the best. And this rich man lived in luxury every single day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Here's how the parable begins. I found two pictures just to illustrate this because I feel like pictures are helpful so that you can have an image in your mind of what's going on in the parable. Here's one. We have our man right there in purple with his fine Egyptian linen. Then we have the beggar Lazarus right outside of his door. The dogs are right there with him. Here's a second depiction of this parable. And I think they both do a pretty good job of showing what's going on here as Jesus opens this story. There's a man with his friends. He's dressed in purple. And then off to the side is someone who's been forgotten, someone who's been cast aside, who is waiting, hoping. So the parable begins with a man, a rich man, who's dressed in purple, wearing fine linen, and every single day, we're told. Every day, not just like Monday through Friday, not just on the weekends. Some of you live in luxury like on a Saturday. You're like, this is my day. Gonna do a spa day. This guy had a spa day every single day, we're told. This detail was put in there for a reason because Jesus wants his listeners to know there was nothing that this man lacked. Whatever he wanted, he got. Whatever his heart desired, he went after, and he was able to acquire it. He went after and wanted the best of the best, and that is what his life was able to provide for him. The best of the best. If he wanted linen from Egypt, well, then he would send someone to Egypt to go and purchase that linen for him. Or if there was fine linen in the marketplace around him, wherever it happened to be from around the world, well, that's what he would go and purchase for himself. This man had no need. There's nothing that he needed because he already had it all. This man has status. Here's that one picture we looked at. He's living the high life. He has his friends. He has his people. He has those who are celebrating living in luxury with him. This man is living the high life. And then you come to Lazarus. Lazarus is the complete opposite. You can't have a greater contrast to how Jesus begins this parable. The rich man dressed in purple with a fine linen, and then here's Lazarus who has great need. He has no friends. He's by himself. No shelter, no food, because what are we told he's doing? He's waiting by the gate, the front door of this rich man, hoping for what? The scraps. That which this rich man has carelessly discarded. Yet to Lazarus, what this man has discarded, what this man has seen as waste, there's riches in the waste. And this beggar, Lazarus, he's also extremely smart because he knows where to hang out. He knows that this rich man, he's going to get bored, tired. He's going to see waste in some of the finest of the fine things that he lives with. And so Lazarus knows this is the home that if I want just a piece, just a taste of that high life, of how that man is living, maybe I can find a morsel of meat left on a bone that's thrown away. Well, then this is the gate. This is the place where I should be spending my time. Now, as we begin this parable with this setup, 3 things to note. First, this parable follows Jesus' teaching on money. Preceding this parable, here's what Jesus was teaching. I tell you, and Jesus was speaking to a large crowd. I tell you, a crowd filled with some of those religious leaders. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And now, quick disclaimer, we could have a whole other sermon going into this particular passage. We're not going to do that this morning. I just want to show you what precedes the parable because it helps us to understand what Jesus is showing and illustrating in the parable that we're looking at this morning. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, well, who's going to give you property of your own? No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, by the way, who loved money. You can't serve God and money. The Pharisees who loved money, implying what? They're serving what? Money rather than the God that they're claiming to serve. Quite deep right here, what is being communicated. They heard all of this, and they were sneering at Jesus. They heard this teaching, and they turned their noses up. They walked away. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And Jesus said to them, hey, you guys over there with your noses turned up, with your backs to me right now, you're walking out of the room. You're the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others. But God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable. Detestable. This is not a weak word. This is a very strong word. Detestable in God's sight. So Jesus teaches this. Pharisees turn their back. It's almost like Jesus is saying, okay, you clearly aren't getting what I'm saying. So stay in the room for a moment. Don't leave quite yet. We have an end credit scene here. Just stay right there where you are. Stay seated because I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate what I'm saying. You're not understanding my words. Let me give you a picture. Let me give you a story. And then he rolls into this parable about a rich man dressed in purple, wearing fine Egyptian linen, and the beggar Lazarus. Second note, this is the only parable where the character is given a name. Normally it's, there was a man, there was a woman, there was a king, there was a landowner. This is the only parable where someone actually has a name, and that name is Lazarus, which is the Hebrew name meaning what? The one whom God helps. You're listening to this parable. You have a rich man who has everything, lacks nothing. Then you have a beggar who's hoping for a morsel, for a scrap. And by using the name Lazarus, Jesus is saying, hey, you know which one God is helping in this situation? Well, you would think it's the rich man because he has everything. You would think that is the epitome of success. That the rich man is the one whom God is favoring. Well, he's rich, he has everything, so he's been blessed by God, obviously. But Jesus is communicating something completely different that goes against the culture, that goes against the entire way of understanding the world. If you're there listening, you hear the name Lazarus, you know what would have happened? Your world would begin to look like this. It'd be turned upside down. If you notice, North America's on the bottom there, South America's on the top. You'd be listening to this, and your entire world view, the way in which you made sense of the world, the way in which you made sense of God. Think about the Pharisees. They thought they were the ones following God, being true to God. We're told they're loving money, they're not serving God. Their whole world would have been turned upside down because Jesus is essentially saying, hey guys, the ones turning your back, sneering, putting your noses up, I'm letting you know that you're totally off the mark here. And let me tell you this story, and let me show you that, well, God is actually with those who have been forgotten. You think God is with you and for you and will continue blessing you with more wealth, but in reality, God is right here with this beggar that you have discarded. Here's a third note for us. We're told that the dogs were licking his sores. Well, why do dogs lick their wounds? This is kind of gross, I know. Hopefully you haven't eaten within the past half an hour. Because the saliva from dogs has healing power. Healing power. What we're told here is that only the dogs are this man's friends. In the ancient world at this time, dogs would have been considered unclean. Jesus is saying, by the dogs attending to Lazarus, it is the so-called unclean who have come to Lazarus' rescue. The ones who aren't supposed to. It's the unclean, those who are far from God, who have actually come to his aid. This, again, is another strike against the religious leaders. Another blow to their ego. Now, all of this is the setup now for the rest of the parable. So let's see how the rest of this parable goes. And I had one more side note. I kind of brushed through this. I think this is important. What Jesus is saying here in this parable right from the beginning, as we're seeing this right in the opener, life is about more than your purple cloth and fine linen and everyday partying. If you're partying every day, then what's being said is that you are not celebrating or you're not respecting Sabbath. If you are not participating in Sabbath because you're partying every day, you're not resting, you're not thanking God, well, Jesus is saying that this rich man had no spiritual life. He had no depth to his being, which is kind of what he's saying about these religious leaders. You think you have a spiritual life, but in reality, your spiritual life is quite shallow. You're after the wrong things, and it's not creating good character within you. Now, let's continue the parable. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side, which then raises a question for us. The question is, can you get a bigger rock star in the Jewish faith than Father Abraham? I tried looking for a picture of Father Abraham with glasses and lights and could not find it. If you're into art, that's your task this week. The time came, the beggar died. The angels carried him to this rock star's side, the father of Israel, the person that everyone looks up to and respects, that their entire tradition has been handed down from. The beggar, Lazarus, the one whom God helps, whom God is with, is carried to whose side? Abraham's side. Now the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where this rich man was in torment, he looked up and he saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. He's a bit confused. How did that? Whoa, did I miss something? How did that happen? So he called him. He said, hey, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Help me. And send Lazarus, that guy that I saw hanging out of my gate, to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember, in your lifetime, you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you, well, they can't do it, even if they wanted to. Nor can anyone cross over from there to us, over here. So the rich man who has died, he answered, he said, well, then I beg you, Father Abraham, send Lazarus to my family. Send him. This guy that I discarded, let's use him now. For I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, well, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. Let them develop their own spiritual life. Let them seek after God on their own. Well, no, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, well, then they'll change their ways. They're not going to listen to these dusty old men and everything they have to say in these books. But if you send someone from the dead, well, then they're really, like, that is going to cause them to open their eyes and pay attention. And Jesus said to them, well, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead. They're so blind, someone, hint, hint, wink, wink, could rise from the dead, and they're still going to miss what God is up to in the world. They're still going to miss the way in which God wants to develop their lives. If they don't develop a spiritual life, well, it doesn't matter who or what happens, they will still miss it. This parable serves as a dire warning, just like last week's parable. These parables, as we said from day one, they're not easy, they're convicting, they're challenging, they're not all comforting. There's someone who has done a lot of work on the parables. He kind of breaks the parables up into three different categories: parables of the kingdom, parables of grace, mercy, and judgment. This would be considered which one of those? Just like last week, a parable of judgment. Now, if we remember back to the teaching on money that Jesus had, one of the questions that he raised for his listeners is, what master is your life serving? You can't serve. You can't serve God and money. There's only one master that your life can be serving. In this parable, here's a question for us to ask ourselves. What master is your life serving? Now, we don't use that word master in our everyday weekly language, so here's another way of asking that question. What is the focus of your life? What is your life focused on? Where do you spend the majority of your time, energy? What is your life focused on? What Jesus is saying in this parable, I think it's pretty clear. He's telling the Pharisees, who were told loved money and who turned their noses up and ran away from Jesus, what Jesus is saying is, hey, you thought your wealth and your comfort and abundance was a gift from God. And it was. You thought Abraham and the God of your ancestors was on your side. But in reality, your wealth, your comfort, your abundance, it has become a hindrance from seeing the needs around you and ultimately serving God. You thought this was all a gift, and it is a gift. But that gift is not supposed to stay with you. And if you make all that you have received, all the blessings that have come your way about, oh wow, look how blessed I am by God. I must be favored by God. If you make it all about yourself and using all the gifts that you receive to continue bettering your position at the expense of others, what's happening is that is all become a hindrance to you serving God in your life. You could pursue the high life, the good life, and not see the great need of those around you. Jesus is saying your lack of compassion, your apathy, your indifference, your self-serving pursuits, your entitlement, you want to know where it's leading you? It's leading you straight to hell. This is a dire warning. When we make life all about ourselves, Jesus is being very clear where that way of living leads you. And it's not to a good place. I don't think Jesus could be any clearer with this. You're not getting this. So let me make this even more clear for all of you who are here listening. If you continue in this path, if you continue neglecting the needs of those around you, those who have gathered at your gate, those who are begging, asking for you just to notice them, if you continue missing their plight, well, here's where your life is heading. Now, 2 or 3, 4, maybe 5 questions. Depends how you categorize them. I always say 2, and then I realize, oh, there's like 5 or 6 other ones. So 2 or 3 or 4 questions for us here this morning. Then we'll get to a final challenge, as if you haven't been challenged enough. First question, what does it mean to serve God? Jesus, before this parable, says, you serve God, you serve money. Choose one or the other, but you can't serve both. So then what does it mean for us to serve God? Servant. A servant is someone who does the master's work. Now this word servant is the word oikotas, which is from oikos, which means household. The servant, we're talking about serving a master. By using this word, what's being said is that a servant is someone who is working for a particular household, for a particular family. And this Greek word, it's not about someone who just mindlessly does the work. They hate their master, they don't like the work that they're doing, but rather this is someone who does their work, who serves their master with affection and devotion because they trust the person that they're working for. They trust that master. In other words, there is a shared goal. They like what this master is trying to accomplish. They like what this master's life is all about. So with joy, they go about serving the household, the family, because this servant wants their life to be about the same things that their master's life is about. So this is not a disgruntled servant. This guy's not going to go postal. This is someone who loves the work that they are doing, which then raises another question. Well, what then is God's work in the world? Because that's what Jesus is talking about here. You serve money, you serve God. Well, if with love and affection and devotion you're serving God, well then what does it mean to work in God's world? What does it mean to share a goal with God? Here's God's work in the world, the way I see it. God is about healing. God's work in the world is about restoring, putting back together that which has been broken. God's work in the world, it's about loving. It's about forgiving. It's about creating a world where no one is forgotten, where no one is passed over. God's work in the world is about bringing wholeness to this creation, to your life, and to the lives of those around you. This is what Jesus was about. This was and continues to be the work of God in the world. Which then raises another question. Well, okay, if that's God's work in the world, well then what does it mean for us to serve God with our lives? What does it mean? Does it mean coming to church on a Sunday morning? Does it mean reading the Bible? Does it mean going to a small group, praying? Is that the epitome of what it means to serve God? Those are all good things. And they're all things that are part of a spiritual life, yes. But the real work, where should all those things lead you, is to use your life, that which you've been gifted with, in service to God's work of healing, restoring, loving others, forgiving, bringing wholeness to this world, making sure that no one lacks, that no one is cast aside, that no one is forgotten. If this is what God's work in the world is about, and if we are servants of God, if we're continuing God's work with love and devotion because we believe wholeheartedly in what God and Jesus are up to in the world, well then this is what our lives are to then be about. Which then raises another question, the way I see it. Well, what is the purpose of religion? Because you had these religious leaders. Clearly they were missing the mark. They had their own idea of what religion was about, and Jesus is like, nah, no. That way of religion, it's leading you straight to hell. And there are ways of doing religion in our world today that will also lead you straight to hell. So then what is the purpose of religion? I love how Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Bible, the Message translation, how he translates this portion of the text. And this was right after Jesus had that teaching on money. When the Pharisees, a money-obsessed bunch, heard him say this thing, they rolled their eyes. Can't you just see it now? And then I love this. Dismissing Jesus as hopelessly out of touch. This guy's crazy. This guy's missing the point. This guy has no idea about God or what God desires for our lives. They rolled their eyes. This guy is out of touch. This guy is some hippie. Forget him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And so Jesus spoke to them. You are masters at making yourselves look good in front of others. You're great at that. You look great, and you're masters at that, of giving the perfect appearance, the perfect religious appearance, but God knows what's behind it. God, again, sees your heart. I love that way of translating this passage. So then religion. Is religion to bolster your position in the world? Is that what religion is all about? Because for the Pharisees, that seemed to be their thing. Look at us. We're in good standing with God. Father Abraham is on our side. He's with us. God is with us. Yeah, the rich man in purple, yeah, that's us because that's who God is favoring. And just kind of flips it all upside down and says, I know you think religion is about this, but here's 3 things that I think Jesus taught about what religion is intended to do for us. It's to learn how to serve God with the blessings that you've received. How about this for another purpose of religion? To see how you are connected to the whole. You thought life was about you and your friends partying up at the expense of this beggar here at your gate, but in reality, you and your lives are connected to his life. And when you forget that, when you distance yourself from others and say, they're not a part of me and this creation, and I don't like them, and how I live my life has no impact upon their lives, you're missing the point. Jesus was all about our connection to each other. How about this for a third reason of the purpose of religion? To confront the sin you carry within so that you can find healing and wholeness. Jesus offered this warning, this parable, because he had hope that the Pharisees could change their path. I don't know how much hope he had, but I believe that he offered this teaching because his hope was that the trajectory of their lives would be changed through this story. That they would be confronted with the way in which they were living their lives, and that they would do an about-face. That instead of making religion and life all about themselves, that their hearts would actually be open to the needs around them. I believe that's why Jesus offered this parable. It was with great hope that he had for whoever happens to read this parable. That it would be a sobering look at our own lives, and we ask ourselves these deep questions. Is there any way that I've made my life simply all about me? And are there any changes that I need to make in my life so I don't walk in that direction like this rich man in purple? I would argue that one of the purposes of religion, according to Jesus, is so that we can confront the darkness, the brokenness that we all have within us. And as we confront that, our apathy, our lack of love, our lack of compassion, as we confront that and admit it, we would then find healing. We would find wholeness within our lives. I think that's what the Pharisees in this moment were missing. Now let's end with the challenge. Or I guess we could say the final challenge. Here's the picture one more time. Question for us. Where are Lazaruses around you? The ones that you are passing by. in your pursuit of the high life? Where the Lazaruses around you? Another way to ask this question: how can you use what you've received to serve the world around you? To be about God's work, the work of Christ. We say here at Awaken, our mission is to create followers of Jesus. Well, that means to live out the words, the teachings, the message of Jesus with our lives. Well, if this is what Jesus was about, making sure that no one was passed over, well then, how do we follow in those footsteps? How do we, as followers of Jesus, then look at our lives and ask ourselves, okay, how can we use the gifts, the blessings that I have received so that I can now go and live out, continue fulfilling the work of Christ in this world? I think this is the question this parable leaves for us this morning. A challenging parable, not an easy one. I think there's so much in there to wrestle through. And my prayer is that we would not go the way of the rich man dressed in purple, rocking the fine Egyptian linen, but that we would walk a path of following Jesus and finding true life and wholeness and connection to the world.